I'm actually going to pass the mic very quickly to Representative Sanchez, who's arrived and who's really the energy behind this with his staff person, Ryan Manganelli.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I'm so happy to see all of you here today. And I want to thank Ann, I want to thank Edith, I want to thank everybody who's participating today. I want to thank Moms Out Front for being our social justice leaders in our community here and Brookline. The activity that, the investment that you folks have made to talk to people in the community has been extremely profound. There's a lot that goes into advocacy, and the way that I've seen Moms Out Front work has been really, it's in this day and age, because there's a lot of noise and everybody seems very aggressive at each other right now. And the way Moms Out Front has come out by walking the streets, posting things out where people walk, where we utilize our greatest assets in our community, our park systems, our roads, the communities we live in, engaging, and also engaging City Hall, and then engaging us in the State House in the way that you've done has been very, it's been very refreshing the way that you've taken this on. Especially in this topic of this issue of gas leaks. I mean, it is a social justice issue for so many in our community. What did so many of us know? We knew that there was a scent of something, right? And it's usually those things, right? Those little things that people just, we live such harried lives, right? And that we're going on, we're just going and going and going and going. But with this particular issue, it's really stuck out. And today's a really important day. Today's a really important day in this effort that we talk about social justice. As was mentioned, Dr. King was assassinated 50 years ago today, amidst the fight for social justice and equality of people of color, through the pacifist lens, which was Dr. King's legacy. That we had to talk to each other, that we had to engage, that we had to respect each other and love each other. And in that spirit, today we passed a major piece of legislation that I think we've worked on my entire life. When I was a kid, I grew up in Mission, Maine in the projects, down in Mission Hill. And growing up in the 70s and the 80s, and those of you that have been here for a while, you know what these communities look like. And it was a tough time for a lot of us. It was a tough time for a lot of us in that we didn't have the term community policing. If anything, we felt like police, being a young Puerto Rican male growing up in the projects, we felt like we were under siege. In the early 70s with the school busing issue, when riot police were sent to the neighborhood, and I remember waking up in the morning and all you heard was this. And it was the riot police that was walking around setting the tone for people that were coming in and those that were in the neighborhood. And then later on, the Stewart murder that happened in '89, when we had a horrible murder where it affected, and I remember the mayor says that if it weren't for my mom and other community leaders, there could have been riots at that time. And today was a big day because we passed a major piece of criminal justice reform today. And frankly, it's on the backs of all of your work. The book, your book that you wrote on some of these issues that we have a minute ago, I'm sure you'll mention it. These issues of how people enter the criminal justice system, the communities where people come from, what people have to live in that environment, and in this case, gas leaks is a part of it as well. But more so, how the criminal justice system treats people. And this particular bill that we passed today, both today we in the House and then the Senate as well, we're going to have it in the governor's desk tomorrow. It's going to treat people as individuals rather than the result of broad-based policies. And it's a profound piece of legislation that we know is going to have a direct impact on so many others, and especially those people of color that have been affected by an unjust criminal justice system. So today was a really big day, so I appreciate you allowing for me just to mention that in the backdrop of what we're talking today. And thank you. And imagine, I've been doing, this is my 15th year in office. I worked for Mayor Menino for 4 years before that, but my entire childhood, I had an activist mother. So to see that happen, and now me being the chair of Ways and Means, I'm so proud that that bill has my name on it. It has my, and I say it has my mother's name on it. So it's a big deal. It's a big deal. Thank you. Thank you for the indulgence. I really appreciate it. Just because today was an emotional day for a lot of people today. So it's with that in mind that I want to talk about gas leaks. Tonight's an opportunity to engage in a conversation that moves us closer to solving and improving the health and the environment, especially in this incredible community that we live in. Because this is not just in Jamaica Plain, or near the pond, in the bucolic community that we live in, but it's in places where in Jamaica Plain and throughout the Commonwealth that people aren't so well off. So we've made significant progress bringing the issues of gas leaks to the forefront. All of you, but for me, when I started, I think I was in my fourth term, and I remember we were working on issues of improving the roadway, the Jamaica Way with DCR, and myself losing my mind over why can't we get certain things addressed. And Sarah Freeman, Kevin Rainsford, and again, the advocates of Mothers Out Front, made a point to make sure that I understood what was going on. And that advocacy is what brought me to actually file a piece of legislation in 2010 to start that conversation of having companies identify where leaks are and to make sure that they address it. And this was long before this issue of leaks was a popular issue, because of your work, it's gained significant amount of steam. In that time, we worked together to pass meaningful policy in the legislature to make sure that we address the environmental and public health effects of gas leaks. And in 2014, we mandated gas companies to report the locations, the severities, and the date of gas leaks. And then in 2016, when we passed the largest, and then in 2016, when we passed the largest procurement of offshore wind and hydropower in the country, that bill also had provisions for gas companies to fix lines if exposed. This, I didn't realize, you go into things, right? You hear things and then you're like, okay, I'm gonna move forward. It's, for me, this was kind of like, well, I was taking on, Northeastern University, the impact they had of their students moving into the neighborhoods in 2000, 2002. And I filed a piece of legislation. And then this wave of people came at me saying, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. The same exact thing happened here. But what I knew in my heart was it was right. And it was in that we were able to work with folks in the community directly and establish the positions that we needed to get worked on immediately. It was a fight, but it was a conversation. And that's what tonight is all about with the experts that we have here today. It's a conversation on, okay, we've done this for, again, 14 and 16, but what does the future look like? Now that, now that I'm in this role, in the new role that I'm in, I have the opportunity to talk to, because nothing happens without the engagement of the body and the membership. I just finished, next week we're putting out the state budget, and I had the pleasure of sitting down with over 150 state representatives to understand the issues in their communities. No other rep has this opportunity. So it allows me an opportunity to ask them what they think and to engage them in conversations and things that we care about. So in your conversation today, my team is here. You saw Ryan, who's been a part of with you, Cecilia, who's a part with you, have great interns from the colleges that are helping us out. Also, Jami's here, because I want for them to understand and for me to understand what else we should be thinking about. So I won't take any more time because I know I've gone over time, but I just wanted to say thank you for this conversation and taking time out of your lives to spend time on this with us. And I want to thank all of you for your advocacy. Sometimes you're going to hear from me and other electeds. Let me see, let me spend time, let me see, let me spend time. But know that it's in that vein that you folks have made the difference, because you've kept me on top of things so that I understand really what's up and what we need to focus on. So thank you, and it's a pleasure to do this with all of you. And I want to thank all of you in organizing this event so we can have the conversation. Have a great day and a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Sanchez. This is actually part of a week-long series of events hosted by Jeff's office and spearheaded by Ryan Manganelli in the back there, who comes from a public health background and sees the opportunity as part of National Public Health Week to put on an event every night. And nationally, the theme for Wednesday is the connection between public health and the environment. And so we were honored as Mothers Out Front to be asked to join in that effort and to continue the conversation that we started in this neighborhood and across the state and increasingly across the country, as Mothers Out Front is into close to 20 states now after being founded here in Massachusetts. We are a group of mothers, grandmothers, aunts, caregivers who advocate for and act for a swift, just, and complete transition away from fossil fuels. I felt passionate about that, and it intensified when I had my daughter Eleanor, who's now 8.5. And I had this idea that I needed to be more active in securing a future for her that I would be excited about and that I would want for her to have. And I think it's become increasingly clear that when we advocate for that swift, just, and complete transition away from fossil fuels, it is also for us right now, because climate change is now. It's no longer a future thing and something we're talking about. When we have sea level rise that we see with regular astronomical tides, not to mention when they double down with a nor'easter, when we see the types of wildfires and hurricanes and droughts and many of these effects around the world and see them come to our doorstep, our actions are meaningful now. And increasingly, there's just more and more evidence that in the case of natural gas, it's not just about the health of the climate, it's about the health of the species that inhabit and depend on that climate. And there are effects on us now, on trees that we depend on now. And so I'm so glad that you are here tonight, because having a conversation, as Jeff said, is important in a democracy. If we're a group of people that believes that change is possible and that we can do better and that progress can be ours if we apply ourselves and we use knowledge and we use science and we use our relationships with each other, that we can change things. I believe that clearly, and I've seen that with Mothers Out Front, that we are able to have an impact. And our elected officials like Jeffrey Sanchez and many others are key players in that. And we're so happy that he created a space for us to have another conversation here tonight. At the end, we hope that you talk to us even more. We'd like to keep talking about these things. You'll see us at Wake Up the Earth. And I just want for a moment the other members of our local team from Mothers Out Front to stand up. Please come and talk to us. We'd like to hear more. And we're going to turn our attention now to hearing more from experts. Jeff talked about growing up in the 70s and 80s. As part of my growing up in the 70s, Saturday mornings was about the League of Justice and the Super Friends. And I felt like when I was preparing the bios, I was like, it's the Super Friends of Boston for environment. And I'm so happy that these folks could join us tonight. They are regular allies and huge advocates and powerful actors for things that are important in our city. First, we have Brita Lundberg, Dr. Brita Lundberg. She is an infectious disease specialist. She's going to share her story, her path into caring about fossil fuels and their impact on health. As part of that, she is on the Occupational and Environmental Health Committee of the Massachusetts Medical Society and speaks on these topics all around the state with public health commissions and really trying to educate people so that we can make better decisions and act differently. She'll be followed by Karen, who's here from the Emerald Necklace Conservancy. She comes to us after long and vibrant stints of service in San Francisco and New York City in their Parks Department, leading some major projects, and we're so happy that she's taken over leadership of the Emerald Necklace Conservancy, which is such a treasure for us in Boston. And our final speaker will be Dr. Nathan Phillips, who is a professor at Boston University. He's the professor of Earth and Environment. It's a big title, Professor of Earth. And he's been a frequent speaker and an advocate and a researcher on the issues of gas leaks and natural gas and its impact in our environment. So we'll all learn a lot more from them tonight. We'll be followed by a question and answer period at the end. So I encourage you to take notes and think about what resonates and be ready to bring more thoughts into the conversation at the close. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Brita.
I'd like to thank Mary Brady and Edith of Mothers Out Front, Ryan Manganelli of Representative Sanchez's office, as well as the JP Forum for inviting me here to speak tonight. In my day job, I'm a physician patient advocate, but I find myself speaking out at this and similar forums because I believe that it's part of my professional responsibility as a physician to advocate for health, for human health and for the health of our environment, to which obviously human health is so closely tied. Please feel free to interrupt me with questions at any time. I consider this a conversation. I can tell that I cut my name off at the bottom there. Excellent. It's Brita Lundberg, and I'm an infectious disease physician and owner and small business owner. So my story begins here. Why this gorgeous picture with the health risks of natural gas? Why did I choose that? Well, that's actually the view from the top of Spruce Knob in West Virginia. So who here has ever had a pipeline put across their property? Show of hands. Okay, so I guess it's just me. So this was my land, right below the top of Spruce Knob. It's right next to the Monongahela State Forest. And I got a letter from my brother one day. It was just the signatory page. We own this land together. My dad bought it in the 1970s because he missed the mountains of Norway, where my family is from. And we would go hiking there. And anyway, I just got this signatory page, and my brother said, please return it. And I thought, well, that's funny. You know, I'm the daughter of a lawyer, and you're supposed to see what you're signing, right? So I went back to him and I said, well, could I see the rest of what I'm signing about this? And so he sent it to me, and it was a complicated contract from Chesapeake Energy wanting to put a pipeline across our, they were going to frack right next to our property, and our property was the only way for them to get a pipeline across this very complicated, gorgeous geographic formation. So that's how I became an involuntary expert on natural gas. So I'm going to talk about the direct effects on health of natural gas leaks. This is just an image of drilling fluid splashing past the liner in Dymont, Pennsylvania. As you can see, whatever is in that drilling fluid is going to just be going right into the water table, right, as it moves down. And so those are what I call the direct effects on human health. This is your land, by the way, and my land. This is Otis Forest in the Berkshires. This is last year. They took down over 2,000 trees in 2 miles to make way for this Kinder Morgan pipeline expansion. But to me, this gets at the indirect effects of pipelines and pipeline infrastructure. In 2 ways, both the actual physical cutting down of these trees. This is 2,000 trees. We have 3 million miles of pipeline infrastructure in this country. And so maybe if you just estimated that half of that goes through forested land, just think of the number. If 2,000 trees came down in 2 miles, think of how many, maybe 1 billion trees, right, are being taken down. So that's a carbon sink. That's, they also create a lot of oxygen, right, for the atmosphere. And then I'm also going to talk about the indirect effect that natural gas has on climate change. So that will be my story. Here again, we're in Otis Forest, and it's interesting to me because you see this pipeline cutting through, and so it's taken down the canopy of that forest, and what's going to happen is light is going to hit the forest floor, more infectious infestations can attack that wood, it's going to weaken it, it's going to make it more susceptible to drought, and it's going to allow invasive species to grow up. And essentially, we're doing that all over the country, right? And so you would expect to see a lot more forest fires if you saw forests weakened in that way. And next. And then this is Tennessee Gas that took 1 million gallons of water from Spectacle Pond just to flush that 2 miles of pipeline. So just try to even get your mind around how much water, and this is just to flush a pipeline. This isn't even to extract the gas. So I just wanted to set the stage with that, and with that I'll go forward, just with a sort of bird's eye view. You know, for those who don't think about natural gas every day, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what natural gas is, what is shale gas specifically, because that's what 80% of the gas we get now in Massachusetts is. What else comes with it when it's extracted out of the earth, and what are the health impacts of those things? What do we know about the health impacts, and what do we still need to know? So everyone knows there's been a phenomenal expansion of the natural gas industry in our country, a huge natural gas boom over the last 15 years. Over 15 million Americans now live in close proximity to this heavy industry. And so what's in natural gas? So it's extracted from complex geologic formations by hydraulic fracturing. So essentially they go down about 10,000 feet into the earth, and then they drill along horizontally, and they blast in under high pressure a slurry that includes millions of gallons, like 1 million gallons of water, sand, and a variety of chemicals, which will then fracture that rock, and the gas and oil will bubble up to the surface and be captured in those storage tanks at the top. And chiefly, it's composed of methane, right? CH4, and other substances that I'll get to. So it's really important in understanding the health effects to just get a kind of a quick visual of the natural gas industry and where this infrastructure goes from and to. So natural gas is carried from the point of extraction at the gas well through a series of gathering lines. They take out the impurities, and then it goes through hundreds and hundreds of miles of transmission lines. And every 60 to 90 miles, there are these compressor stations that keep the pressure up so that it can keep moving forward. And then eventually it gets to the so-called distribution lines that Nathan Phillips will be talking about mostly, where it comes into our houses and to consumers. So what else travels with this methane gas? Importantly, there are criteria air pollutants, and I'm just going to talk about 1 or 2 of them. Ground level ozone. Methane is the second most important contributor to ground level ozone, which is a significant respiratory irritant, thank you. And then particulate matter, which I'll talk about in the next slide. The fluids used to extract it have significant volatile organic compounds in them, all of which have human health impacts. Benzene, most significantly, also toluene and ethylene glycol, and then a whole bunch of proprietary unknowns, which means the industry doesn't want to let us know what else it's in there because, right, we might get upset about it. I think we have enough right here, though, to get upset about. And then, interestingly, very much like coal, entrained with this gas as it comes up to the surface, are elements from the Earth's crust, right? So lead, radioactive radon, and mercury. Okay. I only show this to make you think about what's in these these natural gas pipelines. So these have to be pigged out or cleaned out on a regular basis because this is the stuff that builds up inside. Viscous black powder, dry black powder, and wet black powder. Isn't that nice? But I mention it because when they first wanted to put a pipeline across my property in West Virginia, I said, well, of course, you have to take it out afterward, right? I want it gone. You know, maybe one day I'll want to grow corn there, or I don't know what, you know, up on my little mountain. It's only land. There's no house. And they were like, oh, no, you'd want to abandon this in place when we're finished with it. And I remember at first not understanding, well, why would you want to abandon it in place? And after I saw this slide, I thought, okay, so that's full of benzene and mercury, and maybe abandoning it in place is a good idea. All right, next. Particulate matter. Natural gas is a huge generator of particulate matter. As you can see over in the slide, so this is actually a human hair right here. PM2.5 are these tiny, tiny particles. 4 of them in a row make up the diameter of 1 human hair. When you inhale these go all over your body. They've actually done radioactive tagged experiments showing what these particles do. And when they do that, they don't do good things in your body. They cause decreased lung function, they can aggravate your asthma, they cause heart attacks, high blood pressure, and children are particularly vulnerable. It also is associated with, as I mentioned, hazardous air pollutants. Those include benzene, toluene, xylene. They affect the nervous system, they can cause cancer, they can cause birth defects. And essentially the take-home message here is there's no safe level. I mean, the EPA has to set certain standard levels, right, that can't be exceeded, except in the case of natural gas infrastructure, because of the Halliburton loophole, these guys can be exposed to any much higher levels of benzene. But it's an accepted fact in the medical literature that any level of benzene isn't safe, just like lead, in fact. And I just wanted to show that, in fact, Spectra Energy disclosed that the Algonquin pipeline would contain benzene in the event that this was their submission paper for the Spectra compressor station in Weymouth. There are also radioactive substances. Now, we know these are present at the drill rig. We don't know about whether they're present at the compressor station or in our stoves because we haven't looked. But these are brought along with the extraction of the natural gas, and they decay, so they can then form radioactive polonium, you know, that stuff that the Russians like to do away with their envoys in foreign countries. I'm just joking, but they actually do. And then also radioactive lead. Radon is the leading cause of lung cancer in non-smokers, and it's a significant concern, definitely for the people who live in the vicinity of these drill rigs. I just wanted to mention mercury. Mercury is not just a neurotoxin and a fetotoxin. It is found at the compressor station. It is found at the drill rig. We don't know about farther downstream just because we haven't looked. But these are 2 extremely interesting papers to me, and they get back to what Nathan Phillips is going to talk about later, which is that they're very damaging to gas pipelines. They corrode them. And these 2 studies just showed that one form of mercury can't be contained by aluminum, one can't be contained by polyethylene pipes, one can't be contained by stainless steel. So this is just one caustic element in that slurry that comes up with this methane gas. And so it's a concern, right? Are we ever going to be able to repair those leaks because there are caustic things in the gas itself that corrode the pipeline? So, yes?
They make pipelines of plastic?
They make them, I'll let Nathan address that, out of, they're older pipelines, they're newer pipelines, yeah. Yes.
Are you going to talk a little bit about what happens when they clean pipes?
Well, that actually, I would love to know where this stuff gets disposed of, because as you can imagine, it may have a lot of interesting things in it. We say interesting in medicine, it doesn't have a good connotation. So where do the local health effects occur? So they happen, as I mentioned, near the drill rigs, and then in the processing, transport, delivery, compressor station, and in the distribution lines. And what are those health effects? Well, there have been more than 900 peer-reviewed publications on the environmental, health, and societal effects, almost 80% of those since 2013. And the reason for that is that there's a good bit of latency, you know, between when this novel technique first originated in 2002, it takes a while for humans to show the impact. But one might presume there are going to be impacts because many of the chemicals associated with this extraction, as I mentioned, can cause cancer, are toxic, or endocrine disruptive. So how would humans be exposed? Well, obviously through the air, through gas leaks, but importantly through water contamination also. So the EPA finally acknowledged in February of 2017 that drilling and hydraulic fracturing activities do impact drinking water. And interesting and importantly, 8.6 million Americans are served by a drinking water source that is located within a mile of a fracking well. So what are some of these impacts that we've seen in the literature? Well, not surprisingly, we've seen cancer, leukemia in children, respiratory disease. There was just an article in JAMA about increased incidence in asthma in children who are growing up near these drill rigs in 2016, neurologic disease, increased incidence of congenital heart defects, premature births, and this last one out of Colorado, increase in acute childhood lymphocytic leukemia. I'm just going to jump back to that study because another interesting thing about these studies is that industry will often say that, oh, there are other, you know, there's other heavy industry in the area, so you can't attribute these causes solely to the natural gas industry, right? But these are beautiful studies, 2 of them out of Colorado, because there was nothing else in the area. This is out in the middle of nowhere. So these effects cannot be attributed to other industries. And I just wanted to say that these are heavy effects. These are extremely costly to society and a huge burden on the societies, on the communities that abut these drill rigs. So what about gas leaks in Boston? You know, what should our community concerns be? First of all, obviously, what's in the leaking gas? And does proximity or intensity of the gas leak matter? Are there vulnerable populations? What about children walking to school every day past a big gas leak? What about pregnant women, the elderly who are more at risk for the particulate matter effects, you know, heart disease, stroke? And what about those with chronic medical conditions? And so we don't have a lot of data on what's in the gas from the gas leaks. Nathan will address some of that, but we do have data on what's coming out like in the laboratory. So this Berger et al. Did a study in 2016 where he just sat in his laboratory and he said, well, so I wonder what's in this gas, you know, and see what's coming out of the pipe in my lab. And so, not surprisingly, he found benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene. You're getting the idea. These are the same compounds found at the compressor station and the end of the drill rig. And interestingly, Dr. Kurt Norgaard recently has an ongoing study with the publication results still to come out that shows similar results with at least 100 volatile organic compounds found in homes here in Boston, coming out of stoves, out of people's, you know, the access pipes into their house. So it's not surprising, but it's nice to have confirmation. And so what next? So what might the health effects of those be? Well, a recent study, also 2014, showed that there was a correlation with pediatric asthma in houses that used natural gas in their stoves. And that when you ventilated that gas, the incidence of asthma dropped. I actually didn't know that until I did the research for this, but now I've been using that handy dandy fan, and because I actually use natural gas to cook with, and I ventilate a lot. Both of my children, incidentally, have asthma. So I fall right into that study. Next, please. This is the second part of the story. So now I'm going to switch gears and talk a little bit about what I called the indirect effects of methane gas and its effect on climate change. As you can see, there are leaks throughout the natural gas infrastructure. The EPA estimates 1.7% leakage. You'll notice that they don't even include the leaks from houses and the distribution system, going into that. Some other researchers put it at like 10%. Next. And natural gas has huge climate change impacts. Here I just list this positive feedback loop of the increasing heat in cities, the water quality impacts, the impacts on extreme weather, and they all feed back into one another. So this graph was presented just last week at the National Academy of Sciences in DC at a talk. And so methane levels have increased by 250% since the industrial age, and I know Nathan will cover this also. My breath was just taken away by this slide, right? But there's actually something good hidden in this slide. And what's good that's hidden, if you backtrack 2 slides, is that in the 1980s and 90s and the early part of the 2000s, maybe due to the Clean Air Act and the Nixon era, maybe due to changes in automobile exhaust or whatever, there was actually a flattening of methane emissions. So we can do it, right? So, and then go back, sorry, 2, 4, yeah, there. But right now, that line is almost a vertical line. To me, this was terrifying. At one point I thought, I could just start with this slide and go, okay, now you need you know all you need to know, you can go now. Our work is cut out for us, but anyway, I just think this is an amazing slide. Gas versus coal. I just thought I'd make a small point here that a lot of people say that coal is, of course, so much worse than natural gas. We need natural gas as a bridge fuel. And it is certainly true that at the point of combustion, natural gas is cleaner. But it doesn't take into account all of those leaks along the infrastructure that I mentioned. And because natural gas is methane, and methane absorbs heat, according to some researchers, between 28 and 100 times more potently than CO2, it is a much more significant driver of climate change. And so Mothers Out Front is just right on with their emphasis on this topic. And of course, it also fails to address other important issues: water contamination, earthquakes, toxins, and that kind of thing. This is just a graph showing the comparison between natural gas and coal and their relative methane greenhouse effect versus their CO2 greenhouse effect. But the good news to me is that methane has a residence time in the atmosphere of only 12 years. And so reducing emissions from methane has immediate effects. It immediately slows the rate of climate change, according to this author, Howard Thinnell at Cornell. I just wanted to touch for, and so I just wanted to point out, this is another indirect effect. Methane acidifies the soil, and so it kills trees that way too. It takes the calcium out of the soil. It's therefore killing a lot of sugar maples, killing a lot of trees in Europe, and also just causing this global dimming. If you've noticed, the days are grayer in general. We have a lot more rain this last year than we've ever had before. Our methane levels are going way up, and that particulate matter is causing this global dimming. Paris had 10 hours of light in December 2017. Moscow had 6 minutes. Thanks. I just wanted to finish with 3 different slides. So this is the natural gas pipeline network right now. But does history actually have to be that way? Are all countries doing it like this? You know, sometimes you just think, oh, it's just inevitable, everyone does this, but let's look at the next slide. So here's Canada, and Canada actually looks a lot like Europe. And again, next slide. So wouldn't it be nice, and actually our public transportation system looks a lot like their natural gas system, and wouldn't it be nice to reverse that? To make our public transportation system look like Europe's, to make our reliance on clean energy look like Germany's, where they get 80% of their energy on a really good day from renewables. Wouldn't that be phenomenal? And we could do it, right? Next. So in sum, I'm just going to reiterate there are direct risks, there are indirect risks, and that we can do these local actions. That obviously in this political climate, the action's going to happen at the local level. Incorporating renewable technology in our construction, like they do in Paris and like they're requiring in California, changing our built environment, creating transportation networks that are so much better than, like what we had in the 80s, right, when I was at school at Harvard, right? We had great, really good public transportation that has really corroded to this day. It looks a lot like it did back then, but it doesn't function the way it did back then. And then just to stabilize and decrease those emissions. Just want to say a quick thank you to my colleagues, and then I'll end with a funny slide. Thank you so much.
So Brita set us up with big picture and some like not so enjoyable information. I don't know that the information really gets a lot more enjoyable as we go here, but we're going to bring it to a more local focus and where we recognize it and see it around us in landmarks and places that are familiar to us. And Karen's going to speak to that.
Hi everyone, my name is Karen Mauney-Brodek. I'm the president of the Emerald Necklace Conservancy. I thought I would just briefly, because I tell you how I came to this work. I was started young. This is the way that I think a lot of times we find our way into the careers that we don't realize have chosen us. It was really interesting to hear Jeff Sanchez's story. My parents were engaged in my neighborhood. It was really nice to honor Dr. King just at the beginning of this. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia originally. And down the street from my house, there were some parks that they were planning to build a freeway through. And my parents and other parents in the neighborhood who went to the local public school, a downtown public school that people didn't really think mattered, they all rallied and we had protests and we saved this little park. And it's funny because that was a park designed by Frederick Law Olmsted. I didn't know it at the time. But now, then I ended up working as an architect and a city planner for City of New York and City of San Francisco, and then I had the opportunity to come and work for what Frederick Law Olmsted thought was his greatest park system here, the Emerald Necklace, which you all have lived around many of you your entire lives, and I'm just very jealous. And I think it's really interesting that we're talking about this because I'm really happy to be here with Mothers Out Front, because I really think that experience of parents teaching children what matter really has an effect that we can't even think about today, and I think we see that right now with what's happening on a national gun control conversation. So I guess I'm going to start for time. So I'm really just going to talk about one aspect. There's so many really fascinating aspects that people here are going to talk about. I'm just going to talk about gas effects on trees, and just really speak about it in more basic terms. So, next slide. So the Emerald Necklace, for those of you that haven't had a chance to explore all the parts of it, you probably know the parks right here, but it actually stretches all the way from the portion designed by Frederick Law Olmsted, all the way from the Charles River to Franklin Park. And it's an amazing system. I really encourage you to check it out, and there are maps in the back. So the Conservancy, we're a nonprofit, and we work to try and support the Emerald Necklace. And we've been working on projects around tree planting throughout the necklace, and that's how we came across this issue of gas leaks. So at one point, keep going, sorry. I want to make sure we have time for questions. So again, we're a private nonprofit. We are supported by donations from people throughout Boston and in foundations that help us do our work. We try and support the over 1,000 acres, and we work really closely with the City of Boston, the Town of Brookline, and DCR to try and support the parks. And we have a partnership particularly focused on trees, and that's how this work, this project and these needs came to the fore. So these are the kinds of things we work on: tree maintenance. We have volunteer days. If you want to come out and volunteer, we'd love to have you. Second Saturday, anyone can come. You can also, check out our other programs. We have a summer concert series. I'm sure many of you go to. I won't belabor this, but it's really fun. You should come out and see us. So we've been, one of our biggest projects is a project that we call the Olmsted Tree Society. So we mapped, and in GIS, we essentially created a map of all of the trees in the necklace. There's over 7,000 trees, their condition, their species, and what they need to exist and thrive. And it was this project that sort of helped us start to see some of the issues that were coming up with gas. So one of the things that we've been working on, I mean, there's a lot of great work that has happened as a result of Mothers Out Front advocacy, but pipelines and repairing pipelines are really still only focused on issues of kind of immediate danger to people, which is important, but the kind of slower gas leaks that impact trees aren't considered to be as important, because trees actually are not even considered property in the current standards of how gas leaks are addressed. Trees, of course, are part of our heritage. They provide significant value for environmental protection, so it's kind of absurd, right? The gas could potentially affect these things. Next slide. So we know that trees and the benefit of trees have significant positive impacts, and more people are studying this and are starting to see that trees can have a positive impact on both your mental health, your physical health. These things are things we kind of knew intuitively, but now we have data to support that. So there's even data to show that presence of trees can decrease the incidence of violent crimes. These are all things that are, of course, the kinds of things that we want in our neighborhoods. I had an intern that made these really cute little icons, which I think are pretty great. Let's hear it from interns. So yeah, greenhouse. They can reduce greenhouse gases. They can provide oxygen. I'm sure I don't have to sell anyone in the audience on trees, but they're a good thing. We want to protect them, right? Next slide. So how does gas impact trees? So one way is talking about how it can toxify the soil, and that's really, really important. But just in a really basic way, trees are deprived of the soil, and my intern made this amazing graphic. Next slide. Look at this. We don't immediately see a limb fall off the tree when there's a gas leak, but there are gas leaks throughout the Emerald Necklace, throughout all of the streets in Boston, particularly along the edges of the Emerald Necklace, that have documented gas leaks. So over time, the methane penetrates the soil, pushes out the oxygen, and, oxygen, and suffocates them. And so essentially, the trees are just being strangled in the ground, and you can't see it, right? So you see that a tree is suffering, you see that it's declining over time, and you may not know why it's doing that. And this is happening all over Massachusetts. This is not just happening here. Yes?
Is this a suffocation of the leaves not getting oxygen, or suffocation of the roots?
It's suffocation of the roots not getting oxygen. And I am not a scientist, but there are some here that can talk more about it in specifics. But yes, the roots actually is a major way that trees receive oxygen and nutrients. So by the soil filling with the methane gas, it's pushing out the oxygen particles, and then the oxygen isn't able to get to the tree. So what you see over time is decline. And then the challenge, of course, is everyone can say, oh, well, there's another reason why the tree declined. It's hard to necessarily identify that, but what we have seen is locations along the necklace where there are documented gas leaks where we have seen tree decline. And we can keep going. Thanks. So here's a map. So because it's on the legislation that was put forth, we now have a map of where gas leaks are all around Boston. I hope this scares you. It's kind of a scary graphic. And so we can tell now as we look at our tree inventory and we look at where we can plant trees, part of the challenge that we have as the Emerald Necklace Conservancy is that we have fewer places to replant trees. We want to plant, we sometimes do lose trees, particularly along the parkway, but we lose those opportunities because because we know there's a gas leak. And 2 years ago, we received funding from Ropes and Gray Law Firm, a big law firm that's been in Boston for a long time, to plant 115 trees, which is fantastic. And we had to go out and essentially figure out where we could do this. It's just not as easy because we know that we have gas leaks. We know we have future gas leaks that might impact those trees. And so it's just such a sad irony that we're trying to do something that would actually improve the environment, and we are limited by those locations. The number in the necklace? I don't have that number. I bet the next speaker will. I've got PhDs. 3,000. Let the record show. 3,356. Wow, that we know of. But anyway, okay. So, what the challenges are with these trees declining is that we're losing that value, and we're losing that essentially as a method to combat climate change. So here's a map of the Emerald Necklace, and some of the leaks that we found as we were trying to figure out where we would put new trees. This is just done by hand by one of the volunteers that works with us. And again, I think we still expect over time new gas leaks to spring up. So, that's something we have to continue to test. Nathan's really good testing those, and we have dreams of maybe buying one of those devices and becoming really good at that ourselves. But this is something that we have to continue to monitor. So these are the kinds of things that we have to continue to do: identify where there are gas leaks, classify those at which level, and then try and work to get them fixed. Mothers Out Front actually has this really great program. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but you can walk down the street and see a little sign that they've put on a telephone pole that says, there's a gas leak here, and it's pretty. It's pretty real, and it's a pretty great program to teach people, how this is happening throughout the landscape. I wanted to mention that in a lot of cities, and Nathan may have a chance to talk about this, but a lot of cities are in the middle of suing or in litigation with gas companies over the trees and the value of the trees that have been lost. And in Brookline right now, I think they're in the midst of a settlement right now on this. So this is the kind of thing that I think cities are starting to struggle with and think about how you can be made whole, how we can work to try and improve the environment that we have, and how we might have more opportunities to improve the urban landscape. Because this is one of the major tools we have to combat climate change, is through additional tree plantings and, of course, making our communities healthier places to live. That's all. Thank you.
Trees is a good transition for Nathan in both of these comments, because he spent the first part of his career specifically focused on trees and takes us into a lot of other good stuff.
Okay, thank you. And thanks to the JP Forum, thanks to Ryan and Representative Sanchez and your staff, and Mothers Out Front. You are so awesome. You've done so much. Nathan Phillips, I teach at Boston University. So I'm going to try to go quickly through this. I'm a tree person. I'm a tree physiologist by training, and that's how I came into this study. So this is a tree, a 60-inch copper beech in Newton, where I live, about 1.5 miles away from our home. And we've known about a gas leak there. You can see it's kind of crown shy away from the street. It's been leaking for like 8 years. We've called it in. And just last summer, if you advance the slide, they finally took it down. It was dead. So that was the route in for me. Over the last 7 or 8 years, I've kind of gotten over my imposter syndrome of going from being a tree physiologist to trying to grapple with the greenhouse gas issue, the explosions issue, I think I'm coming a little comfortable with that. Yes? This is Newton. It's LaSalle College, on the campus of LaSalle College. So, yeah, so it's been pointed out, methane anthropogenic rise has been huge over the last centuries. Next slide. Last few years, it's actually, if anything, it's going up even further. There's methane CH4 there in the corner. Next slide. And the most recent research is showing that the rise in methane globally, this is a study in 2018, January, from NASA and Utrecht University in the Netherlands, that the largest portion of the methane rise in the global atmosphere is due to humans. It's due to fossil fuels. 17 out of the 25 teragrams, or 10 to the 12th grams, is due to fossil fuel industry. Next slide. So I just want to run through quickly the scope of the urban gas leaks problem, the impacts, and some solutions. Next slide. Next slide. So this is the 3,356 gas leaks that we mapped out and published in 2013 in Boston. And the questions, just from detecting those, so background methane is a little under 2 parts per million. So you see a few selected values there of the level of methane, 14 parts per million, 22 parts per million. That's in the air that we would be walking through on the streets and sidewalks, okay? So questions immediately came after the study. Well, how much does it all amount to? What's the scope of this problem beyond Boston? So next slide. And, that's the paper that we published on the Boston. It was the first study of its kind in any major city. Next slide. And we found it is a widespread problem. We found over 6,000 leaks in Washington, D.C. If anything, Washington, D.C. is leakier than Boston. Next slide. Manhattan, Durham, North Carolina. It's an eastern seaboard problem. Next slide. And we know why. It's old pipe infrastructure. Look here, this is JP area. It's just a little clip of a bigger pipeline map. But you can see here, 8-inch cast iron, low pressure, 1911. There's a 1911 pipe here. There's some newer pipe. That's a 2009 pipe. 1893, 1893, 1875. These are old cast iron pipes. They come in 12-foot sections. They link together these joints, and the joints leak. So it's just very old infrastructure that we have. You can also see here, just because this is JP, you can see a few locations. I'll be happy to walk through this later on, where there's actually like metering and regulating stations. There's portions of JP that operate at a higher pressure. This light blue is 2 pounds per square inch pressure. There's these critical mains in the green and the blue that are running at 22 pounds per square inch down Center Street and other areas. And all the gray stuff is about a half a pound per square inch in many of the streets of Boston as well as JP. Next slide. So let's just talk quickly about impacts. And Brita, you mentioned a lot of those impacts already, so thank you. We did a follow-up study to ask the question, well, how much does it all amount to, these 3,356 leaks, and the leaks in Worcester and Newton and Wellesley and everywhere else. And so this study that we published in 2014 looked at a network of precision methane analyzers on rooftops, including the top of the Prudential building, on top of our building at BU, at a clean location upwind in Harvard Forest where there's very little gas infrastructure. The blue shades show where the gases, all the pipelines are. So this is kind of like a clean background. And as the predominant winds would move air in this direction, like slabs of air, all of the methane leaks from all of those leaks would be adding into that slab of air as it passed over. And these sites, these tower sites, would be picking that up. And that allowed us to estimate how much is all being added up, okay? And so next slide. We found that study led by Catherine McCain at Harvard estimated that 2.7% of the gas that's delivered into the Commonwealth is leaked into the atmosphere. And that doesn't sound maybe like a lot, but since methane is a greenhouse gas on steroids, as Brita pointed out, that actually amounts to about 10% of the Commonwealth's entire greenhouse gas inventory from all sectors. And it wasn't on any ledger. Now, there's been back and forth with the utilities that, well, maybe it's not that high, but this is the industry's own data here that I've put this on. In 2016, the numbers have gone up, and you can can see 2014, 15, and 16, they estimate 2.3%, what they call pipeline and distribution use, which is known volumes of gas that is either leaked or used for pipeline operations, but known volumes. And at that rate, it's about 8.5% of the Massachusetts gas inventory. So we're not that far apart, actually. Next slide. So just to touch on health impacts, and I am not a health expert, but we went out to this Southern California gas leak you might have heard about a few years ago that was just spewing gas like crazy. They couldn't stop it. It was like the Deepwater Horizon spill except for gas. And it had been going for months. It was leaking like 8,000 feet below the surface, so that's why they couldn't stop it. They had to like drill in from the side to try to encapsulate the leak. And people were getting sick, nosebleeds, headaches. What was causing that? And people had to evacuate the neighborhood. So next slide. And we did a drive around with using the same technology that we used to measure the gas leaks in Boston. And we were measuring values like this. So that's Porter Ranch, 60 parts per million methane. So about 30 times the background value, more than 30 times the background value. It's like being at a campfire, and if the wind blows the smoke, you get blasted with it. If the wind shifts, you could be in kind of like clean air. So it's very intermittent, but values were that high. Okay, next slide. And so it was very interesting for me to find out that the California Office of Environmental Health, and I don't know what the other two names are, the acronym, but the health experts from the state were telling the residents that the sickness the symptoms that they were experiencing was due to the odorant that was added into the natural gas, the sulfur-smelling compounds. So I found that very, very interesting. Here, the symptoms reported by many Porter Ranch residents can be attributed to odorants in the natural gas. This is on the California State website. Next slide.
Which it wasn't, right?
I don't know. I'm not a health expert, but I'm just saying if health experts are telling them it's a problem at gas levels that high, I come back to the Boston area. Here's Sullivan Square in Charlestown. We were measuring 90 parts per million of natural gas in the air. So Porter Ranch was a massive gas leak, but it was like half a mile from the neighborhood. We walk over gas leaks that are much smaller in volume, but they're so much closer to us, and the concentrations in the air can be comparable to the ones that are in Porter Ranch. So that made me think that there could be health issues even in the outdoor air with natural gas. Next slide. So quickly about trees, shifting a little bit. I learned from Bob Ackley, who was the person who clued me in about the tree damage from the start in Newton by complete serendipity. It's not just what you see, but it's what you don't see. So you don't see a tree here, and you wonder why, but you see other clues. You see there probably was a tree there, and in fact there's a stump in there. You see this patch. What was the history of this place? The evidence is already gone. Next slide. This is on the same street in Roslindale, and we're measuring 11% or so gas in the soil in which a tree has just been planted. That tree is dead. So we fail to connect the dots when we don't understand our infrastructure and this was literally on the same street that I showed the previous slide. So next slide. Here's Main Street in Charlestown, Boston, and there's a gas leak right here, and someone tried to put in that little evergreen tree. A month later, it was gone, and again, there's a leak there, there was a tree there, it's gone. So it's often what you see, what you don't see. That's Rob Jackson, a collaborator, and Bob Ackley as well. Next slide. And this is the gas leak. So the invisibility of this problem. So this is Main Street in Charlestown right here, and I forget whether it's this spike, but the gas is coming out. We measured it in the soil, it's coming into the air in the same place. Next slide. It's what you don't see as well. This is a Norway maple in Hingham that the tree department allowed us to dig up. We knew it was being killed by gas, and as it was dying, they chopped it, they dug it up with a backhoe, and I still can't explain this. This is a root. We peeled off the outer layer of the root, and this is not photoshopped. This is I've never seen anything like this. I don't know what this is, but I think it might be methylene blue, which is a very common dye that's used in like biological labs that might have been metabolized as the methane went through the root membrane. Very, very strange, weird stuff. Next slide. There are some signs that you can see. So again, Bob Ackley, I call him the urban naturalist. He sees things and he connects things. This is a fungus called Ganoderma. It's a particular type of fungus that is common on trees that are affected by gas leaks. Next slide. And we've known about this for decades and decades. This is a paper from the Torrey Botanical Group Club. And this, actually, Carrie, you'll like this because this is from New York City this is from 1957, but the author had surveyed a bunch of Norway maples along New York City streets. All these trees were alleged to have been killed or damaged by natural gas escaping from leaking mains. And it goes on to talk about in New Jersey, lots of planted trees as well being killed by natural gas leaks. And it's been pointed out by, I think, Brita, did you mention that the utilities themselves say a sign of a gas leak is dead or dying vegetation. So the science is settled on this, and it is because, or one very big reason is because of the asphyxiation because of no oxygen. Next slide. It's great that we have colleagues, I have colleagues at the Buhs School of Public Health, Madeline Scammell, who is looking at this. It's a big data problem because trees can die for lots of reasons. It's true. So you need to look at correlation and causation at the same time. And you need lots of trees to try to look for patterns. So she's doing that work, next slide, in Chelsea with her student Claire Scholart. And they're doing a GIS spatial study of where damaged trees are, how much proximity they are into gas leaks, and trying to develop the science around that. So, and actually you can see the talk at this website. We had a symposium on natural gas health impacts. Brita was a co-organizer of that. And so there's the URL. You can see her talk on trees. You can see a bunch of other talks as well. Next slide. So just very quickly, I know we're running out of time, solutions, because I can't be a problem, just fixated on problems. That's where Mothers Out Front has just like solutions. And so what we've learned is that you can find and fix the biggest leaks. We have a policy solution. I'll talk about that in a second. And that leads to a policy where we can triage the system and transition off of gas altogether. The just, swift, and complete transition off fossil fuels, we have a pathway to do that. And I'm so excited to work with Mothers Out Front and the home energy efficiency team on that. And there's also ways, I say employ infrastructure ecology. What do I mean by that? We have co-located, interdependent, critical infrastructure all running on or under our streets. They interact. They affect each other. Trees, actually, roots can damage pipes, and pipes can damage trees. But the way we operate cities, by and large, is in isolation, in silos, and we don't think about an ecology of infrastructure. But once we start thinking about how things interact, then the agencies and entities that need to manage those systems can start to actually work together and then find ways to consolidate their efforts and to actually do things a lot more cost effectively so that you don't pave over a leaking pipe. When the street's dug up, you replace the pipeline. I think we're running out of time, so I'm actually going to make that my last slide. Thank you.